Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Hello and welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. This is one of your regular hosts, Matthew. I'll be on my own for this episode, but before I get on to the subject of the episode, we are planning to do a series of episodes examining the Alpha course. Some of you will know that as part of this lockdown process, Holy Trinity Bronton is running Alpha Online, where they are using Zoom to get groups together to run the Alpha course online using video chat. I've taken part in one of these. I've done 2 weeks currently. Week 3 will be this evening. I'm taking notes on each of the episodes and will be giving my thoughts on my experience of the Alpha course and examining some of the points that are made later. In case anyone's worried, I will not be identifying anybody that's on the course that I'm doing. I don't think that is right or appropriate. But if you have any thoughts on the Alpha course, are you doing the Alpha course? I would be really interested to hear from you. Maybe I can get you on and we can, one of the episodes, we can talk about our experiences of the Alpha course. I don't care whether you are Christian or atheist, whether you're positive or negative towards the Alpha course. I think a variety of opinions is good because I want it to be a discussion, not just a free-for-all bashing. So that's that on the Alpha course, so please get in touch if you've got thoughts or experience. You'll also hopefully have listened to the previous episode of Still Unbelievable where Andrew and I had a conversation with Jonathan McClatchy following his appearance with friend of the show David over on Unbelievable with Justin Brierley. It's not yet been confirmed, but we're hoping to have a second episode with Jonathan. So if you have any questions that you would like us to put to Jonathan, any clarifications from the show or any comments and critiques either of the questioning from Andrew and myself or of the answers from Jonathan, please do get in touch and we can see what we can do to try to clarify that. Finally, you also all know that Andrew and myself also run the Proscenium podcast, where we try to have interesting and different conversations which go beyond the scope of religion and specifically Christianity. We've got 2 recent episodes on there, one with Andrew talking with Darren and Doug on thinking. I think that's a really good conversation that they had. There's also another episode where we have 3 teenagers on the show talking about their experiences of lockdown, what it means to have their exams cancelled, what that means for them for this summer. Again, that's quite an interesting conversation from talking about COVID from a very different perspective to what we're seeing in the news. So please pop over to Proscenium Podcast and listen to those episodes as well. So with the housekeeping out of the way, on to what I want to talk about for this show. This period of global shutdown thanks to COVID-19 has led to a lot of Christian commentary on the challenge that suffering brings to arguments for a loving God. On his Unbelievable podcast, Justin Brierley has done a good job of bringing some of those people into conversation. Unfortunately, some of them have expressed truly shocking comments in the name of Christianity, and in doing so have revealed just how uncaring the Christian God that they worship actually is. This isn't about the images seen on our TV screens of anti-lockdown protests in America, or about church pastors insisting on holding services, thereby running the risk of increasing the incidence of COVID-19 in the local population. While these are acts of extremely poor judgment, they are not exclusive to Christians, and there are many Christians who are rightly condemning these actions because we do know, or at least we all should know, that not keeping an appropriate distance between each other does increase the number of people getting infected with COVID-19. No, what this is about is the high-profile Christian apologists, the ones who make money selling books and taking part in public debates, are saying. Because what they say impacts a far greater number of people, and what they say influences how other Christians think and behave. This is of critical importance because these apologists are taken seriously by many Christians worldwide. Why should I care about that? After all, I'm atheist. I don't take them seriously. I don't believe in a God, and I certainly don't believe in their God. So why should I be bothered about what they say to other believers? I care, because how those believers behave affects me. Anyone who challenges the now very well-known advice on social distancing risks passing on COVID-19 to myself or my family. My social media feeds do have people in them who are openly questioning the source of COVID-19 and the appropriate measures that we should take to protect ourselves. One of the things that bothers me is that Christians are disproportionately represented in this group. This is why I do this podcast, why I engage with dialogue and criticism of Christianity. When Christians ignore advice and knowledge that is gathered through hard work and diligent application of the scientific method because it somehow challenges their comforting beliefs, then they put other people's lives at risk. The global COVID-19 pandemic is just such a situation where ignoring the advice of scientists and instead pandering to your belief could kill you. I don't want that. In this conversation with William Lane Craig, Justin asks, why does God allow coronavirus to happen? Craig says he's tried hard to find some philosophical insight, but says there's nothing new to what has already been said on suffering, and he calls the virus a fusion between natural evil and moral evil. He talks about the alleged laboratory release of the virus as though that's what the accepted narrative really is. It's not. The scientists who are studying the virus say the evidence does not support this idea. Public people like Craig making comments on the situation really do need to make the effort to ensure that they are not making misleading statements. We expect this level of attention to detail from politicians and news reporters. Apologists making public statements should be held by the same standards. By saying what he said, Craig is adding legitimacy to an idea that is not supported by those who are studying the virus. The very people with access to the most relevant and accurate data. The side effect of this is that it also gives Christians license to reject other things scientists say which may contradict their beliefs. This is how we end up with young Earth creationists, moon landing hoaxers, and vaccine deniers. And yes, there are Christians who fit into one or more of those categories. Craig goes on to say that, with our limited cognition, we have no way of judging if God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing suffering to occur. If the Christian God does exist, and that God is as Craig describes, then yes, it may be true that we cannot comprehend a sufficient reason for why that God would allow this pandemic to happen. But that's not a good reason for not questioning it. In fact, we should question that. I think it's a good moral quality to question why any God would allow this to happen, especially if that is supposedly a loving God who wants the best for us. Craig's comment effectively shirks that responsibility and creates an environment where any perceived evil is allowed to happen because God has permitted it. My challenge in situations like this is, if you're a parent, would you let any child of yours suffer for a good reason? And while they are suffering, remain silent and not in any way let your child know the reason for the suffering? I know I wouldn't, and I hope no other parent would either. And yet this loving Christian God who is likened to a good parent is consistently silent when a clear directive would literally make a world of difference. Suffering for a moral good is only beneficial if that moral good is communicated. A good and loving God with morally sufficient reasons for allowing suffering, but remains silent, is indistinguishable from a repugnant evil God that relishes suffering. Craig's sycophantic pandering to a mute deity is morally and intellectually bankrupt. When challenged by Justin on his comments on the unsupported conspiracy that the virus came from a lab through mishandling by a technician, Craig's response is that it's in the news. He makes no reference to what the scientists studying the virus and its spread have reported. There is a disturbing level of credulity on display here, too much acceptance on what is repeated by certain media outlets, and not enough scepticism applied to an idea that has no evidential support. Now this is probably more an indictment of American culture than religion specifically. However, do also bear in mind that Christianity has a much greater influence on American politics and certain media outlets than it does in the UK. Also, looking at my social media feeds, those who share Craig's apparent acceptance of the laboratory conspiracy tend to be more sympathetic to religious ideas. I can't help but wonder if there is a relationship between those who can't accept unguided evolution due to their religion and those who won't accept that COVID-19 is caused by a virus that jumps the species boundary and has evolved to be very adept at infecting humans. Craig then moves the conversation onto the problem of evil and aims his sights at the atheist who criticises Christians for taking the same precautions against COVID-19 instead of relying on God to protect them. The problem of evil does not deliver a sucker punch here, as Craig suggests. I've had similar conversations with Christians where I've asked the question, If you had a choice of either prayer or the advised precautions, which would you choose? The response has always been to choose both, and to oppose the dichotomy that has been presented. The point that gets missed by the Christian giving this response is that if prayer had any effect, it would be measurable in fewer Christians being infected. If the Christian God really was protecting Christians, then it would be safe for them to have public meetings and not get infected. That isn't the case, and so it is appropriate to point that out. Craig does get it right by pointing out that Christians are not exempt from being infected. However, he doesn't make the link from that being true to how the problem of evil delivers its alleged sucker punch. As is typical, he makes the two statements separately and leaves it at that. This is exactly the kind of disingenuous assertion that Craig is famous for, and why atheists like myself simply can't understand why Christians hold so much regard for him. If Christians are just as prone to suffering as everyone else, then there is no benefit to being a Christian, and prayer is of zero benefit, so you may as well not bother praying, and instead use your time giving practical support to your fellow humans, because that does deliver a benefit. Not content with that, Craig digs his hole even deeper by suggesting that his God uses suffering like this to bring us into a loving relationship with him. I call nonsense on that. Pandemics like this are a direct challenge to the Christian God, because that God is likened to a loving parent who cares deeply for his children. And yet I know of no human parent who would watch their offspring suffer like this and remain silent and hidden. The most effective way for a parent to lose the respect and love of their child is for that parent to behave the way the Christian God behaves. This allegedly perfect and infinitely wise Christian God can't even act like a half-decent human parent. It's not only William Lane Craig who represents a deeply unattractive version of Christianity. Consider the conversation Justin had with John Lennox earlier in April, where they discussed a new book Lennox has written on the subject of this new coronavirus. Lennox, like Craig, makes a distinction between moral evil and natural evil, natural being events in nature, like cancer or earthquakes, while moral is actions performed by persons. It is interesting that neither Craig nor Lennox actually defines what evil is. It is assumed the listener understands what is meant. And yet there are some who don't think earthquakes are evil, and there are some who think the Christian doctrine of hell is evil. So evil has a very subjective attribution, and unless the likes of Lennox and Craig define what is actually evil, their distinctions are essentially meaningless. During the discussion, Lennox presents the perfectly valid question: could God have created a world without evil? Lennox's reply is to assert that such a world be a world without free will and without love, and that we would be wishing ourselves out of existence. Without explaining why that is the case, Lennox deftly moves on to make another assertion, that moral evil entailed a damaged creation, and he brings up thorns, thistles and viruses, but these are natural according to his earlier definition, and he does this without explaining how they are linked. There is a contradiction in these assertions by Lennox. Based on what he has said, a world with moral evil is a world within a damaged creation. So creation must have originally had no evil, and evil only appeared after creation was damaged. Yet a world without moral evil is a world without free will, and if free will and moral evil are linked, then free will is also the result of a damaged creation. So where was free will before creation was damaged? Lennox also inserted that a world without free will and without moral evil would also be a world without love. So are free will and love also the result of a damaged creation? He doesn't say. It leaves me wondering what he must think of heaven. I have always understood heaven to be perfect, without any evil. Does that mean heaven has no free will and no love? That sounds truly dreadful. Having left his previous assertions hanging and with no explanation, Lennox jumps straight to another excellent question. Given we have a mixed world, is there any evidence anywhere for a God that we can trust with it? Justin suggests that there are atheists listening that would answer that the world is as it is. It's a natural world. He's right, and I agree. The world looks natural and is explained naturally. Lennox correctly says that this answer does not remove suffering and it doesn't give hope. True, but then why would anyone expect that? No one is claiming a natural world does do that, and no one who accepts the natural world is looking for it to give hope or to remove suffering. But that does not mean that a natural world is a world without hope. Lennox is referring to the Christian concept of hope in a higher being. Humans can have hope in each other, and we can alleviate each other's suffering. It's a small jump from what Lennox says to making the suggestion that a world without God is a world of hopelessness. This is nonsense. Humans have a fabulous capacity for caring for each other and for giving hope in tough situations. This is on display every time there is a crisis. The Christian God is not necessary for this to be true. In talking about atheists, Lennox claims that atheists will call this pandemic evil and pass moral judgments on it. Well, I've not seen a single atheist call this pandemic evil. I know I certainly wouldn't call it evil. I think Lennox has forgotten that evil is a man-made definition. We assign the label evil to things that we detest. Calling something evil does not validate his religion nor his God, both of which I find repugnant. And so what if an atheist does call this pandemic evil? That's simply them giving their heartfelt opinion. There is no great significance there. The same is true about atheists having moral values. I don't steal from my neighbours because I want to live in a world where people can trust those who they live next door to. And I happen to know that treating others well is the best way to motivate them into treating you well. How we behave towards others has an impact. Act violently or disrespectfully and the impact is negative. Act politely and respectfully and the impact is positive. There is no great mystery here. Reciprocal behaviour is older than humanity and is witnessed in other animals as well as in humans. We have labels for these types of behaviour so that we can identify them in conversation. Human society and communication has evolved to include these preferences and labels. No God is required for this to be the case, and Lennox's feeble attempt to disparage an entire demographic is based on a myth that is way too common amongst Christians, and it really needs to die. To make matters worse, Justin comments that it's in recognising that there is intrinsic value in fellow humans that we're prepared to let the economy tank in order to save lives. And yet, when we look to America, a country that has far more Christian influence in its government than the countries that make up the EU, we see a country that is failing to look after its people as well as it could. The people in America who are protesting about the lockdown and complaining about the effect on the economy are predominantly from the more religious parts of the country. Those who are doing their best to maintain social distancing measures are the atheists. Justin only needs to look at his own unbelievable Facebook discussion group and see that those who are most anti the lockdown measures are the Christians. While it is true that not all Christians take that view, it is true that those who do take that view are overwhelmingly the Christians. These throwaway statements tying the recognition of human value to Christianity are demonstrably wrong, and Justin does himself no favours when he joins in with Lennox in repeating this lie. He has, after all, been talking with atheists for more than 10 years. Justin, you should know better by now. And as if that's not enough, Justin has another interview with an apologist with a book to sell. This time it's Becky Pippert. Pippert reiterates the idea that Christianity gives meaning and purpose to life, while secular society does not. Regardless of the truth of that, and I question that claim since my life does have meaning and I don't need Christianity to affirm it, what Pippert does not do is explain why that claim is significant. Why should I care if meaning only comes from Christianity? There are Christians who will say I'm going to spend eternity in hell, and there are Christians who say I will be annihilated on death. Neither of those options suggests that Christianity grants my life meaning. Like Craig in his conversation, Pippert makes an assertion and, without justifying it, moves on swiftly to make another assertion. This time it's that God is in control in this period of global shutdown due to COVID-19. Apparently all this uncertainty, increased deaths, plunging economies, is a loving God being in control. Pippert suggests that this catastrophe is a gift because it enables us to see reality as it is. Is the Christian God so impotent that he can't enable his creation to see reality without some form of calamity? How is what's going on in the world right now a gift from a God? Like Lennox, Pippert describes a God that is indistinguishable from a devious trickster. I genuinely worry that some Christian apologists have an utterly perverted concept of love. Are you a parent, dear listener? Would you be happy if their school teachers used suffering to teach them their school material? Which school teachers motivate your child more? The ones that cause them to suffer, or the ones that encourage and compliment them? I would hope you answered the latter. I know I did. Would you let your child suffer at a distance in order to learn the lesson, or would you prefer to work alongside your child and teach them through direct communication? Did you answer the latter again? I really hope so. Now compare with Pippert's God, who thinks letting this virus loose on the world is how you teach in a controlled and loving way. Pippert's God is straight out of Roman folklore, and those gods were dicks. Pippert reiterates the obscene idea that God uses events like this to draw people to him. She uses the word revival. I think that revivals have had their day. We understand terrible natural events so much better now than 100 years ago. People only rushed to gods when they had no way to explain or control events. With COVID-19 we can explain the event, and we will eventually manage it through medical advances. This did not come from a god, and it will be managed without a god as well. Pippert is using the revival trope to fire up the faithful. Let's check back this time next year and see what the revival status is. I am confident there will be none. Justin asks a very good question on the force of rising secularism. In this very modern age of rapidly increasing scientific discovery and knowledge, Christians are no longer able to convince others like they once were. More people are turning away from religious belief than are turning towards it. Pippert's final words in the conversation are that God wants to do something great. Well, what's stopping him? I could list several great things he could do, and each one of them would turn myself and many other atheists around the globe into instant believers. Yet what does he do? Absolutely nothing. Is the Christian God so impotent that he can only sit there in heaven wishing he could do something great? Where's the God that fed thousands who were starving in the desert? Where's the God that spoke through animals? Where's the God who could stop people in their tracks with a blinding vision? I applaud Justin for putting in the effort to do these extra interviews during this time of lockdown. They have been very revealing, but not in the way he hopes. What these interviews have done is expose how horrific the Christian God really is, and how impotent Christianity is when it comes to explaining the real value of life. We should be glad that, like every God before him, the Christian God is just another fictional despot. You have been listening to a podcast by Reason Press. To get in touch, email reasonpress@gmail.com or see our website reasonpress.net, where you'll also find our book Still Unbelievable. We welcome all feedback, and you might even end up on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. You can hear more of her music at soundcloud.com/hollybishop. You can support us by buying some of Holly's music and telling her we sent you.